Well, our feature speaker for this morning is a guy that most of you know and have heard either his teaching or his sermons. And to introduce him this morning, to give you a little more depth as to what Steve does, is Dean Weaver. Dean, come on up and introduce Steve.
So I'm going to just get a little bit more promo for Paul McNulty before I get into talking about Steve and trying to make him look good. Paul is an interesting guy. He was the Deputy Attorney General who actually prosecuted Zacharias after 9/11. Like, he was the guy who put all of the guys from 9/11 into Gitmo. Like, he was the lead prosecutor on that guy. I walked into his office the other day and I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I'm a little scattered right now." He said, "I've been up the last couple of nights helping my friend Bob, with his new job and help preparing him for that job." And I looked over on his shelves and there was a picture of him and Bob Barr, the new Attorney General of the United States. He'd been up all night prepping him for his confirmation hearings. There's a lovely picture of him and his dad sitting together with Bob Dole on his dad's 80th birthday when John Ashcroft came into the room and sang happy birthday to his dad with Bob Dole. I mean, his stories and the things that he has been privileged to be a part of for a kid that grew up in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, the places he's been, the things he's done have been stunning. But more than that, he is a man who, the closer I get to him and the more I get to know him, the deeper and more profound my respect becomes. And he's going to speak on the 7 steps, 7 principles, really, of 7 biblical encouragements for godly living. That's going to be his topic of his conversation. And he's just, I just would love for you guys to be there and bring all of your friends to come and hear him, because he's just that good. He's worth every second of it for you to be here. Now, on to our speaker for today. I've been doing this for 34 years, and I would say that all of the time I have been pastoring, I have not come across an elder who is as good an elder as Steve Little, and as good an elder as he is. And we have a deep bench here, surrounded by great elders. And the guy who's leading our group up here in Corky is as good an elder as you're ever going to come across. Roger, Kevin, I could just keep Jeff, Pete, I could just keep going around this room. One is better than the other. It's just stunning, the depth of people that we have here. But Steve has been, more than a great elder, has been a really wonderful friend. And I've really enjoyed the time that he and I have gotten deeper in our relationship with one another. He and Heather are blessed to have 3 kids. They have Aaron, Drew, and Kate. Of course, Kate is from Sierra Leone, which is another connection that Steve and I share. He is on the board of directors of Edunations, has traveled there on a couple of occasions, including right in the heart of the Ebola clinic or crisis, in order to be able to secure his daughter. So he has a strong and fearless faith in terms of doing what is right and moving into that place with biblical confidence. He is the chairman of the Department of Chemical and Molecular Engineering. Did I get that right?
Close.
Chemical and Petroleum Engineering. Petroleum Engineering. I always get that confused because it's like he's not really a petroleum guy so much. It's just the name of this department. But whereas everybody else thinks, there's so much to study out there, Steve and his colleagues realize there may be more to study at the molecular level than there is even in outer space. As seemingly infinite as it is out there, it's even more so as you get smaller and smaller and smaller. And it blows my mind the kind of stuff that he is exploring and playing with. He's a graduate, his PhD is from MIT. When they were looking for the chairman of the department, of his department at Pitt, they looked all around the country to try to hire somebody, and all the smart people around the country said, why in the world would we come and be the chair of that department when the smartest guy on the planet in that department is actually already in your department? You need to hire that guy, because we're not going to come and try to tell him what to do. So Pitt had to actually change the rules for how old you could be in order to be the chair of the department because he was too young to fit their criteria. He was also named to Pittsburgh's 40 under 40 not that long ago. His level of depth and quality and integrity that he brings is beyond compare. He is weary from traveling all around the country all the time, in addition to all the other stuff he does, because he has become a leading expert in trials around the country when testifying to maybe it's intellectual property law or patent issues, where someone's got to get down to the molecular level and say, yes, they stole their patent on this. He's the lights out closer for that stuff. When they call him in and he says, I've got factual evidence that this was stolen, there's no other way they could have duplicated this, that pretty much ends the deal. So he's in pretty high demand to fly around the country and testify to stuff like that. And beyond that, as part of our sermon study group, I would say his sermon last summer on Thou Shalt Not Steal is one of the best sermons I have heard in a long, long time. It was lights out good. If you haven't heard it, you got to go back on our Facebook page and watch it. And right now he's teaching the class on Sunday morning. So there's 100 people on Sunday morning that are leaving every Sunday morning saying, why isn't that guy in the pulpit preaching? Get rid of him. I mean, that guy is really lights out good. But it's fun because we work on those things back and forth together. And that together part is part of what makes him such a great friend and a fantastic elder and father and a wonderful brother in Christ who's worthy of all of our attention for the next little bit. Would you give a warm welcome to our own Steve?
Thank you, Dean. That introduction was exactly how I asked you to memorize it. So I really appreciate that. Welcome. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces here and a lot of faces that I don't know. So whenever Corky asked me to come up and do this, he had said, you know, I think it would just be really great for you to come to these and talk and for people to get to know you. So I'm going to do this a little bit more informally than I typically do when preaching a sermon. But the topic I have here, the title that I have is Building Something Better. So I'm going to talk about some things that I'm going through right now in my life, and I'm going to tell some stories throughout my life. And you'll see how those connect, and ultimately how God was really tearing something down and building into something that was better and more useful to Him. So before we get into that, let's just pray for a minute, okay? Father, we ask you to be in this room. I see all of these men that you have created. You've created them to be strong in this community, be strong in their families, be strong here for each other, and for this place to be a place where they would be built up and renewed. I ask that you would speak through me and that you would speak through all of them so that they would be empowered and that you would continue to build them into what you would want them to be, so that you would live with them and you would accomplish great things through them. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I am currently going through right now a major home renovation. And we have Tom Gogol here, who I would highly recommend if you're ever thinking about doing a home renovation. Amen. He actually worked on Dean's house, right? We wanted to do this home renovation because we had done a renovation before in our bathroom upstairs. And the bathroom was, we moved into the house and the bathroom really wasn't what we wanted it to be. It was one of those places where when we moved in, it was not what we had envisioned it to be, so we wanted to turn it into something that fit us whenever we moved into that space. So we did this bathroom renovation, and through this process, I have to say, it was extremely uncomfortable. You have everything right where you want it to be. And then all of a sudden, everything is in opposite places, and it's in different places, and you have to use the kids' bathroom instead of that, or a bathroom in your basement. And it just is a really, really uncomfortable thing. But when it was done, it was more suitable for what Heather and I wanted it to be. So that was similar on the entire first floor of our house. We have very old carpet there. One room that we had was didn't really even have furniture in it because our kids were so young, we really didn't want to buy nice furniture because we just thought they would destroy it. So we kind of just left it completely empty for them to just have to romp around while my wife would cook and clean and do things that she does in the kitchen. So we never really had a living room. But once we got to the point where we felt like we had enough money to do what we wanted to do, it was time to do the renovation so that it was what we wanted it to be in that space. Now, going through that renovation now has been even harder for a couple of reasons. The first are just sort of the surface level things. So on a regular basis, there's just a lot of noise. It's just the way that it has to be. And then there's a lot of people in our house on a regular basis doing those kind of things. So it's very hard to focus and pay attention to various things, right? So there's that sort of like nuisance that's important to be able to do a home renovation. But then it goes deeper than that, because like the bathroom, now there's things that I don't have access to that I used to have access to. And I'm actually finding that those things were the things that I counted on to kind of give me strength and build me up. We were talking here at the table about routines and how we need those kind of routines. I would wake up every morning, I would come downstairs, I would sit at my table and have some coffee, and we have a bird feeder, and I would sit there and watch the birds come in and out, and I would kind of gather strength for my day, and then, okay, let's go, right? Now, whenever I get up, I have to go down to my basement, which is where everything is, and we're all living out of this basement. I had this nice bar that was nice and clean, and it was all mine, and it had all the stuff in the right places, and it had this little sink that I would use to clean up, down there. Now that sink is just full of cereal bowls, and there are book bags laying in the middle of the floor, and just things absolutely everywhere. And it's impossible to do dishes in this little tiny sink. So it's just constantly messy. We're all living in that space, and it's very uncomfortable. It's not the space that we had before, and it's not what I got used to having access to. So there's that level, but then there's another level, and this really took some introspection for me to kind of pull out Heather. And that's that, and we talked about this at this table this morning too, when you walk into the space, it feels as if it's not your space anymore. At least not what you come to. And even when it's done, Dean was saying that when he looks at it, it's better now than what he had before. But it almost feels like it's not yours. You come in and you say, wow, whose house is this? Right? Now it may be better, right? But it just doesn't feel like it's yours anymore. And there's a bit of disturbing, it's a little disturbing to sort of go in and see that. And just to give you an idea, Tom and his crew, this is absolutely amazing, comes in and with just a very short period of time, completely strips and eliminates everything from this space. It was just remarkable how quick he was able to do this, and how quick it was that I became very uncomfortable, and how quick it was that I lost access to all of the things that I had before, and how quick it was that I ended up living in my basement. Of course, there are reasons we did this. We thought about it, and we planned for this. We knew that this is what we want, so we planned for it, right? We wanted it, and it's worth a lot, so you pay for it, right? You pay a lot for it because you want it to be better than what it was before, right? And it's hard to imagine because, living in this discomfort, you did all these things. It's like, wow, what your hope is that it would be something better. Now, I've had a number of these things in my life, and I'm going to take you through some of these this morning that kind of mirror this for me, that upon reflection of this, I feel like it's kind of the same thing. The first that I'll give you that happened, probably the biggest renovation in my life that happened, was marrying my wife, Heather.
Amen.
Now, when I met Heather, I was in college, and she'll give you some kind of BS story about how I went to her and tried to ask her out, which is complete rubbish. She came up and gave me a back rub while I was doing my homework. That was how I first got introduced to her. But this girl was absolutely lovely. I completely fell in love with her, and from that moment, when that happened, I kind of started to envision and dream what it would like to be married to this wonderful woman, right? So I had thought about it from the first time I saw it, planned for it. And then in the following summers, I worked multiple jobs doing landscaping throughout the entire summers. The first one was to buy her a wedding ring, and the second one was to pay for our honeymoon. So I certainly paid for that because I wanted it and I had planned for it. And then what happened was when we first got married, it was just this most absolutely fabulous thing. She came down the aisle in this beautiful dress and she had this smile, and it was kind of all for me. And felt like it was kind of all about me. And then whenever we went on our honeymoon, we went to Punta Cana in the Caribbean, which was absolutely magnificent. And again, it's just this wonderful thing. But then shortly after, we moved to Boston, which is where I went to school, and I guess she realized that I wasn't going away. She was moving in, so some changes needed to be made. And she started to tell me about some of the things that I did. And started to tell me about some of the things that I said. You know, it's funny, Tim Keller, in a book about marriage, says that getting married is kind of like looking into a mirror for the first time in your adult life. Because you start to see yourself through someone else's eyes, and they start telling you about the things that you probably didn't even realize. And you have to start changing those things because she's moving in. And the space needs to be someplace where she can thrive and I can thrive together. Not just where I can thrive by myself. And it was hard. But I wanted this. And I planned for this. And I even paid for this. And it was very, very hard. The next thing that I'll tell you about is when we were in Boston, we were up there because I went to school. And as Dean mentioned, I went to a school up there that's pretty well known. The program that I got into was Course 10, and people call it the Widowmaker. And I'll explain a little bit why. The instructors that I had that taught me chemical engineering, each of them were the ones that wrote the book on that particular topic in the field at large. And I would wake up in the morning, every morning in this program, around 5 or 5:30, and I would go to work before Heather even woke up to go to school. I would come home for a very short period of time to eat dinner. When she was there, she would come home from school and she would prep dinner. I would see her for probably about an hour, and then I would go back. And then I would come back home anytime between 11 o'clock at night and 3 in the morning, which is after she went to bed. And it was like that every single day for the entire first semester that I was there. The only day off that I had, and this was also Saturdays and Sundays, the only day off that I had was Thanksgiving Day. And I'll never forget it because she had prepared this like beautiful Thanksgiving dinner that was the first time she ever tried to put one of these together in our extremely small apartment. And I remember this because I went to get something in the office suite, and amongst the blow-up mattresses that were laying everywhere where everyone slept in this one little office that we had, I walked in and there was no one there. The only time in that entire semester that I saw that someone wasn't there, right? And there was one time I remember coming back for that 5 o'clock dinner, and she hadn't gotten home yet because of traffic. And I sat in there by myself, and it was quiet, and I just wept. Because it was one of the hardest things. I basically had these people that understood how the world worked, from the scale that we see to the molecular scale. And they were basically rewriting every intuition that I had about this. And it was excruciating. But basically, that truth was something that they knew that I needed in order to be effective in what I do. And that needed to move in. And all of the rest of the misconceptions that I had, that I grew comfortable in, and the way that I thought the world worked, needed to go. And it was excruciating. But this is something that I wanted. And this is something that I planned for. Right? And it's certainly something that I paid for, to go through this. It was one of the most excruciating times in my life. And then around that same time, we also found a church up in Boston called Park Street Church. It's a pretty famous church. In fact, a couple weeks ago, we had a speaker come in, and he had mentioned this church briefly, and had mentioned that there was a very famous pastor there called Harold Ockenga, who was in charge of the church for many years. And then the person who succeeded him was Gordon Hugenberger. And he was an amazing preacher and speaker. And the church was very reformed, which was something that was very new to me at that point in time in my life. And as I got more involved in the church and even moved into leadership roles in this church, they're very serious about you believing in the same things that they believe, and you understanding in the same way that we are, that you need to understand that this is what we believe before you get closer to us and join. And one of the pieces of the Reformed faith that I really had not struggled with that much up to this point in time in my life was the sovereignty of God. That He is in charge of absolutely everything. There are no decisions that are outside of His control. That He is on the throne all the time. Not some of the time, absolutely all of the time. Well, of course, this was something that I kind of had a problem with. And I can think of all kinds of things that messed with my understanding of the world and what was fair and what wasn't fair. But I had some pastors that came to me and talked to me and tried to mentor me through this, and I feel really bad for them because I really thought I was smart. And I gave a valiant case against what they were trying to convince me of. And I thought I did a pretty good job of it. Thought maybe I would even convince that entire church that I was right. And what they did was they finally, after working with me for several weeks on this, because I kept going back again and again about this, and I thought, here he comes again. They finally sent me to read this. This is Jonathan Edwards over here on your left-hand side, and he was my match. That's putting it lightly. And the book that they had me read, or the treatise that they had me read, if you could read this, is a careful and strict inquiry into the modern prevailing notions of that freedom of will, which is supposed to be essential for moral agency, virtue, vice, reward, punishment, praise and blame. And basically what Jonathan Edwards did was take every argument that I had ever come up with, and every argument that I hadn't even come up with yet, and completely and totally demolish it. And explain that there really was no other way to have a God that is described to us in the Scripture, that is the God that we read about. That God has to be sovereign. He has to be in control all the time. Well, of course, this stripped me down to my very being. Everything that I thought was right, and everything that I thought was wrong, and everything that I thought that God should do or ought to be was completely destroyed. I remember there was a week, and Heather will tell you about this, where I don't think I slept at all. Just every night, reading and trying to figure out and grasping for something. It was a massive renovation, probably of the biggest that I've gone through in my life. But looking back at it now in retrospect, what God was doing is He was explaining to me that if He was going to be moving in, and that He was going to be with me, that there were some changes that needed to be made, and that I needed to realize who He was, and that He wasn't going to compromise on that, right? So then now, a number of years later, I've had a number of these things, and small renovations in my life, like the bathroom upstairs, larger one like the one that I just described to you, and they haven't been comfortable. And I was going to tell you about one more, which is a story that Dean was telling here before about my daughter Kate. Now, in about the 2013 time frame, I got involved in Edunations. Actually was involved in it before peripherally. And there was an opportunity to go to Sierra Leone. So my wife and I said, we think that would be pretty good to go to Sierra Leone to see this. And around that time, we had kids, and I had access to a pretty nice camera. So what I wanted to do was really take great pictures of my kids. And I even started reading about children's photography, something that I got really excited about. And I'll show you why here in a second. But when we went on this trip, this was the team. that went with us. You might see some familiar faces here. And one of the things you'll notice is that this picture and only 2 others were ones that had me in it. And the reason why is, and I'll show, this is Roger here. Now, you lost this guitar, didn't you?
No, it's still here.
Do you have it? You lost one on that trip.
Well, it was gone for 2 weeks,
Oh, so you got it back.
but it came home.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Yeah, so you might recognize this face, Roger went with me, but of the pictures, and the ones I'll show this morning, or any of the ones that we had on this trip, I'm only in 3 of them. And that's because I took the pictures. So this was a picture of me looking at the pictures. But this was the camera that I brought with me. And some of the pictures that we took, I think, were really remarkable. And I've shown them to some people, and they've said, hey, these aren't too shabby. I got really into this because my kids are like this too, but I think the kids in Sierra Leone were even more interesting in this regard. Kids are really fun to photograph. It's kind of like a hunt. You kind of got to get them in their native environment. And if they see you, trying to take a picture of them, they act differently, right? So you kind of got to get them to be in the right environment where they don't see you. And I'll show you a couple of examples of this. Here's one where I was taking a picture of a girl, and I can't remember the location of this. They were building a church in that area we went to. But anyways, she was very solemn, and the children I noticed, and many of the adults, have a very solemn look whenever you're trying to take a picture of them. But this isn't really the picture that I would want. So what happened was somebody, I think, said that they could play around with a phone. So what we did is we gave them a phone and they were playing around with it. And boy, they were having a great time. And I was waiting for her to look up. And right whenever she looked up, I got this. Yeah. Right? So this is the picture that you want, right? But this was absolutely fascinating to me. So I took tons and tons and tons of children's pictures throughout the week. This one is a common one that you'll see. This story is really great because there were 3 or 4 guys that were hanging around this girl and would not leave her alone. She was apparently very popular. Beautiful young girl. And I was trying to get her picture, but they wouldn't leave, and they were posing and all this stuff. So what I did was I went over here and I tried to start, acting like I was taking pictures of this. And what happened was all the guys came over this way to come and get into my frame. And then I turned around, and she was by herself. And this little smile was, I know what you did there. But you might recognize this picture because we send it out all the time. Hanky means thank you in Creole and Sierra Leone. Another picture that we use all the time. And another. This is one that we use to describe how we build, we dig wells in the communities for the churches. So this whole experience of me taking pictures, though, and this is one that we don't use, but this is one that captivated, a series of these captivated my wife. So this is a picture of some girls that are actually in the first town we were at, learning how to head fetch. So they're learning how to carry water on their heads. And it's the older girls that are teaching the younger girl that you'll see over here on the right-hand side how to do this. And this is her learning how to do this with just the littlest tiny cup on her head with some water. But this was the one that we took that really captured my wife. She kept coming back to this picture of this little girl with the water sort of pouring down her head. And this was the picture that started, that was the spark in my wife's heart, that said, I think we should adopt a little girl from Sierra Leone. Now, around that time, the country was shut down for adoption. We couldn't adopt. And for many years, we waited and waited, nothing was happening, and maybe my wife said, maybe what we're supposed to do is adopt somebody from another country. So we explored that from another country, and that fell through, and it didn't work. And then several years later, right around the time, the company, or the country opened up again, and we started to explore adoption, and ultimately Samuel ended up identifying a little girl, and he named her Catherine, and this was her. So this was our little girl in Sierra Leone, and you may know the story, Dean mentioned it, that around that time, whenever it was time to go over to get her, you had a little disease outbreak in the country called the Ebola outbreak. You might have heard about it. And if you remember around that time, the fear that gripped the United States in this disease was, it was tremendous. My university instituted a policy that you weren't allowed to go over to Sierra Leone, even for medical reasons, because there were people that wanted to go over there to offer medical help. And the school, obviously, for liability reasons, the lawyers got involved and said, no, it's allowed going over there. So I was like, whoa, I could potentially lose my job by going over there. At the same time, there were news stories around the country of parents going over to offer medical aid, and then they would come back, and other parents would picket the schools so their kids couldn't come to school, because they thought there was a possibility that since the parents went over there, they might pass it to the kids, and then the kids go into the school and give it to their kids. So there was a possibility even that if anybody found out about this, my kids couldn't even go to school anymore. Finally, after a while of delaying and hoping that the outbreak would cease and we'd be able to go over after it got done, the conditions were such that we needed to make a decision. Either we were going over there and securing Kate's adoption in the courts, or she was going to be put into an adoption agency in Sierra Leone, a nursery or something. And basically, it was my wife and I trying to decide what we did. Do we just walk away from this, or we call to this? I talked about this with my friends, and there was a particular friend that I have that is a very good friend of mine, a very rational guy, a guy that I respect a lot. And he said to me, Steve, think about your kids. Like, you can't do this. Right? I mean, what's going to happen if something happens to you? You have to think about your kids, he said to me. And it was just a heart-wrenching thing. I finally decided that we were going to go over at first. And what happened was we secured a ticket to go over, and the judge, it was a 24-hour period when I secured the ticket, the judge that was going to hear our case died. So that really took us back. And then finally, we got to the point again where we were told, if you don't come over, this adoption is going to be terminated. So what I did was I decided to keep it secret. I wasn't going to tell work. I wasn't going to tell, there was a small group of people here at the church that knew about it. That Heather was going to stay home. I was going to go over myself, which was some small risk that since Heather wasn't there in court, that we weren't going to be able to bring Kate home. That I was going to go over myself. And then whenever I came home, I was going to quarantine myself in my basement for 21 days. So that my kids could go to school, and at least I had some level of integrity to say that I wasn't, around my kids sending them to school. Pastor Betsy went over with me, which I would imagine was an excruciating decision for Roger and Betsy as well, to try to decide whether or not to take that risk and to have the courage to do it. And I'm eternally grateful for both of them for that, because her help and presence throughout that process was absolutely invaluable. But then we went over and we did this. And it was really this amazing thing. That it wasn't the threat that we thought that it was. The trip went very, very smoothly. And then ultimately, we ended up being able to secure Kate's adoption and bring her home. But I'll tell you what, the decision to actually go was excruciating. Absolutely excruciating. I thought about my life and my family and my kids and all that I had. And I kept thinking about what my friend told me. Think about your kids, think about your family, think about what you have, right? And this idea of comfort and the things that I had access to, right? But God had something else in mind. He had something else in mind to make it even better. And I'll just, show you now, this was the picture of Kate in Sierra Leone. And then this is here, the picture of her before her baptism that we did at the church, and Betsy and Dean did this baptism of Kate. And then I'm also going to show you a picture of just a number of years here later. And I've shared this with a couple of you, that this was on one of Kate's birthdays just recently. Let's see if I can get this to play.
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Kate. Happy birthday.
this isn't a better life than I had before, then I don't know what I'm talking about now. But one of the things that I think, despite the fact that this was all excruciating whenever we went through it, one of the things that I think that I realized that God wasn't just Kate that was moving in, it was God showing me something else that was a part of his being, which is what it's like to actually sacrifice for somebody else. And it was something that he taught me, even to the point, again, like I am now, living in my basement from what I had before. But then, in the end, you have something better. The scripture that I have here this morning is in 2 Corinthians, and I just have this one here that I'll read to you, but it actually fits in with what Paul's saying in chapter 4, 5, and 6 in Corinthians. And what he's talking about is this concept of our bodies being a tent, and that it's something that's becoming something greater. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling. Because we are clothed, we will not be found naked, for when we're in this tent, we groan and are burdened. Because we do not wish to be unclothed, we clothe instead with our heavenly dwelling. So that which is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Now the one who has fashioned us for this very purpose is God, who has given us the Spirit as a deposit, guaranteeing what is to come. And I'll stop there. In chapter 4, Paul talks about how there is this treasure in jars of clay, right? And what is the treasure that's in the jar of clay? Yeah, the Holy Spirit is moving in. And that those changes need to be made. And there's this groaning that we have to be turned into something eternal, something that is more than what we are, right? And then later in chapter 6, Paul talks about the same thing, that the temple of God that it's talking about is here. This is the temple. So when you're going through some of these extremely hard things that you're dealing with in your life, excruciating things, things that make you have to give up your comforts for some period of time, realize that God isn't just making you a better life. He's making a better you. Because he wants to live with us. And we're talking this entire semester about the book of Isaiah. And it talks about in Isaiah about how God will come and live with us. Right? And that's the hope, that he'll live with us. But if he comes and lives with us, some renovations need to be made. And those are not comfortable. And those are not easy. And whenever you think about what Christ did in order to make those renovations, he planned for it. And he wanted it. And he paid for it. A very dear price. So that he could turn you and your heart into the throne room of God. Let's pray. Lord, as we ponder what it means that you would be so gracious, that you would pay for and plan for from the moment you saw us, a change in our hearts, such that you would come to live with us. And that you paid such a dear price for that. You could have stayed in your comfort, and your riches, and your wealth. But what you did was you came to live in the basement, to be with us, and that you're with us through all of the hard things in our life, so that we would become better, so that we would become closer to you. In Christ's name we pray, amen. So for the questions, Corky asked me to come up with a couple of things for you. Here are my 3 questions. The first one is, if God moves more and more into your heart every day, which I think that if each of us were to be honest, we ask God for that, don't we? We say, please come more and more. Is it even possible for that experience to be comfortable? That's the first question that I have for you. The second one is for you at your table to share a time in your life, upon reflection, that was a major renovation in your life, and talk about how God built something better through that. And the last one is, what do you think the most important thing is to living through such a major renovation of your life? All right? Thank you, guys.